It's almost comical to think now, but there was a time, shortly before Todd Phillips' Joker opened in theaters, that critics and journalists, mostly in the online sphere, were convinced that the movie was dangerous and that screenings of the film would incite waves of violence from audiences whose minds would surely be warped the second they saw Joker dance down the steps to Gary Glitter's Rock and Roll Part 2. That didn't happen, of course, with audiences getting that yes in the end. This is just a movie, albeit one that grossed over $1 billion worldwide and won an Oscar for its star. Yet it feels like Todd Phillips, to some extent, might have taken some of those criticisms to heart, with Joker, Folie, Deux reframing Arthur Fleck's tale as less a dark psychological descent into madness and more of a tragedy of a man whose trauma made him a monster. Granted, there was some of that in the first movie, but this makes a bold attempt to distance itself from the DC universe, setting Arthur's story as something distinctive from the clown prince of crime we all know from the rest of Batman's lore. So in this one, while on trial for his life, Arthur Fleck, once again played by Joaquin Phoenix, meets a fellow psychiatric patient named Lee, played by Lady Gaga, who is obsessed with the crimes he committed as Joker. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting is that I saw this movie with an audience that was full of people cosplaying as Joker and Harley Quinn, and watching them walk out of the theater at the end of the screening I attended, they couldn't help but look a little bit dejected as the credits rolled. This film just lacked the same kind of impact the original movie had, despite a longer, bloated running time and a much heftier budget. It almost feels like an apology for the first film in a strange way. Perhaps Joker was too big of a hit not to get a sequel, but watching Joker Folie, Deux, you get the distinct feeling that this was an exercise in style for Phillips, rather than a sequel that just had to be made, with him dipping his toe into the musical genre, perhaps paving his way for him to tackle a wholly musical project as his next film. As it is, though, this Joker sequel spins its wheels and winds up being an often dull courtroom movie, livened up by occasional flights of fancy into musical numbers. Those sequences are the best in the film, as without them, this would feel like a wholly unnecessary epilogue to what was originally a pretty powerful film. Joaquin Phoenix once again delivers a strong turn as Arthur Fleck / Joker, with him able to show off the fact that, as Walk the Line proved, he has a pretty good singing voice in the various numbers that are covers of everything from Stevie Wonder to the Carpenters. Yet he's passive in the movie, without much opportunity to explode in the often terrifying way he did in the original, with this a surprisingly non-violent film, save for one fairly grisly fantasy sequence. Lady Gaga's much-anticipated Lee, a variation on Harley Quinn, also proves to be a big disappointment, with her role feeling ultimately inconsequential despite all the build-up. She's always had a dynamic presence on screen, but she's quite restrained as Lee, which is a shame, as given that this is a musical sequel to the Joker, one couldn't help but hope that the film would be operatic. Instead, Phillips seems to be making his own version of Martin Scorsese's New York, New York, with the slick musical numbers punctuated by melodrama. I expected more fireworks from the star pairing, but it didn't really pan out that way. Neither are bad, but they're just not as iconic as one would have hoped. The vibe of the movie also seems a bit off compared to the first one, with Brendan Gleeson's psychiatric guard feeling like he walked off the set of a 1940s gangster movie, while Steve Coogan hams it up a little too much as a reporter who's interviewing Fleck. Of the supporting cast, the only one who really impresses is Lee Gill as one of Arthur's former co-workers, and one of the few that he spared in his original Rampage. His sequence, where he comes back from the first movie and testifies in court to the crimes that he witnessed, is actually quite striking and is by far the film's most memorable sequence. It's also worth noting that Joker Folie, Deux, despite being shot in IMAX, lacks any real show-stopping moments, even though DP Lawrence Shear once again contributes some striking cinematography. And I have to say, the score, which was great in the first movie, is similarly good in the sequel. Part of me does wonder, however, if perhaps sequels aren't Todd Phillips' thing, as neither Hangover follow-up ever managed to capture the magic of the original, and the same charge could be levied at this. However, the disappointing Hangover Part 3 paved the way for Joker, so even if Folie, Deux feels like an anti-climax, I can't help but think that Phillips perhaps has another masterpiece up his sleeve somewhere, even if this isn't it. He's recently said that he's through making movies in the DC sandbox, and having seen this, perhaps it's for the best. I give this one pretty disappointing 5 out of 10.